Oke, Bapak dan Ibu sekalian bisa kita mulai ya. Tes. Suara masuk ya Fikri ya? Oke. Oke, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi, morning, Bapak dan Ibu sekalian serta rekan-rekan mahasiswa. Pagi ini sesuai rencana kita akan mendengarkan begitu ya kuliah tamu dari Profesor Almantas Liudas Samalavicius. Beliau adalah profesor di Vilnius Gediminas Technical University, Department of Architectural Fundamentals, Theory and Art. Beliau, saya akan berbicara dalam bahasa Inggris. Excuse me, Professor. He does research in various subfields related to architecture, urbanism and built environments, as well as cultural critics, literature and higher education, and often employs as an interdisciplinary perspective. So this morning we are very glad to have you here now, Professor, to deliver your presentation about your expertise. In this occasion, we have a hybrid kind of session. In this classroom, we have attendance from the head of department, the head of a study program, and also professors, as well as graduate students. While in the online, we have another attendance from faculty members, professors, and also head of study programs. So without further ado, let me introduce for the introductory remark by our Dean, Ibu Sri Mariati, to give a short introduction. Bu Sri Mariati, please.
Yes, distinguished the Chief of School of Architecture, Planning and Policy Development Senate, Professor Haryo Winarso. He is in the Zoom now. Distinguished Professor Almantas Samalavicius, distinguished Vice Dean for Academic, Dr. Aswin Indra Prasta, and Vice Dean for Resources, Ibu Dr. Puspita Dirgahayani. Distinguished all of the chief of research cluster and all of program coordinator and all of participant. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Assalamualaikum, warmest greeting from ITB Bandung, Indonesia. We would like to welcome Professor Almantas Samalavicius from Department of Architectural Fundamental Theory and Art from Vilnius Gediminas Technical University, Lithuania. Professor Almantas, I hope you are doing well, and we are delighted to have you here today. Professor Almantas has been in Indonesia since last Sunday and has started his activities as a visiting professor at a School of Architecture, Planning and Policy Development last Monday. Professor Almantas will end his visit at ITB on Friday, and his visit was funded by Erasmus Fund, and it was delayed due to COVID-19 pandemic. The host of this visit is Architectural Design Research Group. On this occasion, I would like to thank the chairman of the Architectural Design Research Group, Professor Wijaya Martokusumo, and all members of the research group. Brief introduction about our school, Professor. We are located in 3 campuses here in Ganesha, and then Jatinangor. Jatinangor is for architecture landscape. Here we have the program coordinator, Bapak Budi Faisal, PhD, and Cirebon. Cirebon for undergraduate program for urban and regional planning. Cirebon is around 3 hours driving from Bandung, and I think this is also heritage city.
of building on traditional architecture and on vernacular. Because one of the, so to say, core assumptions of modernism was that traditions are outdated, traditional architecture should be forgotten, and all the new architecture should follow, so to say, the modernist paradigm. Now, recently, Michael Doherty and Nikos Salinaros, two well-known American authors and theorists, they noted a very curious fact that science forces us to conclude that the modernist view of environmental structure itself appears unmodern and unsustainable. It rests upon now largely discredited theories of culture, technology, environmental geometry, and building form. Theories that have never been properly reassessed by their proponents. Far from being an inevitable product of inexorable historical force, the evidence reveals 20th century design to develop as a series of rather peculiar, historically highly contingent choices by a few influential individuals. This is how modernism came into being. We know also the seminal dates. 1972 is considered to be the end of modernism, when the housing project of Prof at St. Louis in the state of Missouri in the United States was demolished. This is how this project looked like, and you can recognize they are now all over the world. You find replicas of this building, and these are the famous photos. They have been reproduced dozens of times in various books. This is how it ended, because it turned out that this modernism paradigm, it never worked. This type of housing, this type of attitude towards urban environment actually produced crime, produced violence, and the authorities of St. Louis, they had no other alternative than just to demolish these buildings. Now I would like my lecture is focused on traditional and vernacular architecture, but I started to speak about modernism, and I think it is very important because we can't speak about traditional architecture as well as vernacular architecture without the context of the last century. If we forget that all the assumptions that professional architects, academies of architecture, all the attitudes towards traditional and they were to be the last and only word on everything. Now, as some of you might well know, in vernacular. Published And Bernard Rudolphsky was American, but he came from Central Europe. He was, of course, well aware with building traditions and architectural traditions of his home country. He noted, let me now quote, there is much to learn from architecture before it became an expert's art. The untutored builders in space and time demonstrate an admirable balance for fitting their buildings into natural surroundings. Instead of destroying or trying to conquer nature, as we do, they welcome the vagaries of climate and the challenges of topography. As we find flat, featureless country, most liking, more by rugged country. In fact, they do not hesitate to seek out the most complicated configurations in the landscape. So today, Rudolphsky's exhibition and the accompanying book has been analyzed by numerous authors, and of course, from the present perspective, we can find very many flaws in this book and exhibition, because, for example, when you look at the photos are in this book were never dated. We don't know neither who are the authors of these photos, nor at what particular period they were, so to say, made. The other, of course, debatable issue is whether there really can be architecture without architects. Of course, if we mean architect, professional person who is contracted and who is paid for the building, then of course we can speak about architecture without architects. If we speak about human beings who have skills to build, who know how to build, and who can teach how to build, then we can call them architects, even if these people are not professional. Of course, Rudolphsky did not discuss thoroughly these issues, and he is rightly criticized today for certain shortcomings. But I think the most important thing is not just to criticize for what he did not do, or things that he did not in the right way. But the most important thing is to understand his contribution. Actually, this was the most important picture at that time was mainly westernized. There were only certain episodes in the human history and certain geographical areas that were properly discussed and presented. And a lot of the remaining world was never, so to say, included into architectural discourse. And of course, combined with modernist attitudes toward environment, towards, so to say, towards the past, of course, no traditional or vernacular architecture was taken seriously. Modernists, of course, adopted the idea of progress, and we know that today philosophers and sociologists have very mixed views, very complicated views about the progress, because progress provides new technologies, but it also gives us new ethical, moral problems, and there is no just, it's a very many-sided phenomenon. And of course, modernist view of progress was very simplistic, very simplified. They simply believe that new architecture, the modernist paradigm, will create a new world. And today, of course, we see the consequences. We are not satisfied with what modernism or industrial mode of architecture has produced. So now I would like to give a short discussion about new findings of traditional architecture. And my colleague, who is professor of Modernism University and director of Rome program of Notre Dame University, for a number of years has conducted a very unusual study. He published several books, and one of these books in particular is titled "The Sustainable City is Possible." So the name of this professor is Ettore Maria Mazzola, and what he did, he conducted the research trying to compare traditional and contemporary modern architecture. He chose Garbatella and San Saba quarters in Rome. These are significant parts of Rome which were built before the Second World War in 1920s and 1930s. So Garbatella quarters were built using traditional, pre-modern urban and architectural forms. And this project was inspired by the Garden City movement. Now, known today as the iconic quarters of Rome, it is famous because it has a high market value. People want to move into these quarters. And the other interesting fact is that now, hundreds of years after these quarters were built, they never required essential renovation or rebuilding. And Mazzola was very much interested in this fact because there were a lot of quarters that were built using the modernist paradigm. And he aim to compare and see what are the advantages of traditional ways of building. Well, this area that he entered was and remains to the very day very vast, and on the other hand, unexplored, because generally, ideologically, we are not encouraged to make comparisons between modernism and anything that went before. The idea is that modernism is something that cannot be compared, which is actually senseless because you can compare different phenomena, only you have to find the right way how to do that, how to make calculations and how to make findings. So his idea and his hypothesis was that traditional architecture is in very aspect more advantageous than any way of contemporary building. So actually using and converting contemporary parameters of evaluating. Now you see some of the photos. How these quarters look today. Of course, they were designed by professional architects. There was a group of Italian architects, but they were no big stars. They were simply good masters of their profession who knew still these traditional ways of building. And using and converting contemporary parameters of evaluating construction costs as well as energy consumption, he compared these quarters of Garbatella and San Saba with modernist quarters of Cordiana. Ormiana was built already after World War II in the 70s, and 80s. You see, these are quite simple buildings, but they use brick, they use traditional construction methods, and so on. Yeah, these are the views of Garbatella. I don't have here pictures of Sansaba, but basically it's more or less the same. Now let us have a look at the Corviana housing project in Rome that was started in 1972. It was affected by modernist urban and architectural concepts that dominated during the era. And the project was implemented by a group of 23 architects that were coordinated by Mario Fiorentino. And the direct inspirations for this project was famous Unité Habitation by Le Corbusier. So actually, what happened? This is the present view of Corviana. So actually, people hate it. They try to escape. They try to leave it. Nobody wants to stay to live. You know, people only stay there because they have no money to move elsewhere. And as you see, it looks very much abandoned. Even people stay today. This is yeah. So as you see, there is nothing unique. You can find such quarters in almost every city of the world. However, what is interesting that Gorbatella quarters where there was a concept, very serious concept behind it. There was a very progressive pre-fascist government in Italy, and they turned to urban sociologists. So they conducted studies of how people live, how they would like to live, and so on. So basically, they took lessons from sociologist Orano, who made a previous research on Testaccio living quarters. And actually, this was their idea of how to make a public house. And they decided to apply traditional methods, pre-modern methods that were used for several centuries. Political, of course, attitude of those Italian governments of the time was to widespread municipal domain. So in contemporary terms, we would say that it was an anti-neoliberalist attitude, because they wanted that public control, actually a lot of public and of course, the municipality of Rome acknowledged that it was a great housing crisis in Rome, because a lot of people were moving to the city looking for jobs. Of course, they realized that it was a very complex, very big issue. So they started with legislation. They adopted a number of laws that allowed them, so to say, to make these housing projects to meet the needs of public housing. They also established certain institutions like the National Building Union, which was involved in redevelopment and reconstruction of some of the living quarters in Rome, including Gorbatella and Sansaba. In the 1920s, they actually preferred the concept of palazzina. It's a specifically Italian type of house that houses several families. It's not owned by one family, it's several families that own this house. And what was very important at that period, that each of these palazina, they had a small garden around it, so that people could use and children could play. And the Madela quarters were designed by a group of architects, and one of them, Gustavo Giovannoni, drew a general plan of the area. So the qualities of this housing project was that these buildings were unified, but not subjected to uniform design. There was a respect for local character. The social role of town planning was acknowledged, and also the importance of affordable costs and aesthetic character was also acknowledged. Besides, there was respect to all classes of citizens, so that it would not become, so to say, used only by rich or a citizen who can afford better places. So Mazzola focused on these examples, and he evaluated the construction costs, the labor costs, the cost of materials, the cost of transportations and rents. And he found out that the construction works were carried out in a surprising time, just in 6 months. Meanwhile, contemporary housing project take much more time to be implemented. So these buildings now are mostly between 80 to 100 years, and they never required reconstruction and maintenance because of the fact that traditional materials and traditional techniques were used. So Mazzola compares these projects, these living projects, to the contemporary buildings, and he notes that contemporary buildings require maintenance immediately after 5 or 10 years. So in this sense, they are absolutely unsustainable. He draws conclusions about so to say, the value of traditional architecture and traditional ways of building. So first of all, it uses easily available materials. It uses economic construction. The maintenance costs are reduced. It uses supplies that doesn't require long distance transportation. It keeps earnings in local economy, and it helps, so to say, the development of local economy. So this is not purely an architectural phenomenon. This is also an economic and social phenomenon. Besides, he notices the reduction of energy consumption for heating and cooling buildings. And last but not least, he notices the harmonization of buildings with the landscape of Rome. Meanwhile, this cordiality has no relation, any relation to neither to urban fabric of Rome, nor to its architectural styles, nor the way how people. Because when you take Rudolphi's book, it is now outdated. You know, the quality of the print is comparatively low. So I tried just to locate these areas and the photos that he used in the book, and I will show you. So these are examples of vernacular architecture from different periods and different places. As he presents no dates, I also present no dates. Just this is for visual information. So these are from different geographical locations. These actual examples are from Africa. These are already from other places, from European continent, but all this is traditional and vernacular way of building and living. This is a traditional Islamic city taken from, so to say, general view. This is my picture, which I took in Myanmar or Burma some 7 years ago. As you see, there is a strong, in all these pictures, there is a strong relationship between buildings, materials, and language. Even the colors are adjusted, which you rarely find in modern buildings. Now this is that connects the interest of Rudovsky and Mazzola. This is a traditional Iranian tower. They're called wind towers. And Mazzola suggests in his book that this is not these buildings. They are not historical in a sense, because people in Iran and other places in this geographical area are still using it successfully. I visited Iran 2 times, and I was interested in another thing. I was very much interested in the system of Qanat, the underground water reservoirs, which they use for more than 1,000 years. And these traditional devices, these vernacular devices, they are not meant for any tourist curiosity. They are a fact of people's life. People use them. And Mazzola suggests that people who really care about sustainability issues, when they speak about warm climate countries, they could learn from these traditional examples, they could study, and they could apply them. I'm not now going to discuss this particular issue. This is just to show what are, so to say, the implications of his study. Now, my other focus in this lecture is vernacular materials. And as we know both from history and experience, that people in vernacular architecture, in vernacular building, people always use local material. There was a famous historian, architectural historian, art historian of the 19th century, Hippolyte, French art historian, and he noticed already almost 200 years ago that when you move, when you go through one region to another, you can easily see how the colors change because of material. In some places you see gray stone, and then you see brownish or yellowish colors, then you can see white buildings. Because traditional vernacular buildings were always related to the locality, local materials. Transportation was never made. And even when I was studying the history of Lithuanian Baroque, I learned that if you compare to Italy and Rome, they could not afford bringing with the river transportation of those days. For example, they could not bring marble. And besides, marble was not suitable for a cold climate of Lithuania. So it was supplemented by other local materials. Now, in the 20th century, we were met with a new idea that you can bring things from all over the globe, that all the materials can be synthetically produced, and they can travel for hundreds and thousands of kilometers, and they can be shipped today from one continent to another. And of course, if we speak about traditional materials in vernacular architecture, so it's either stone, bricks, or wood. And of course, I realized that I just have one lecture, so I have to make choices. I cannot discuss everything. So I decided that I will focus on wood for a number of reasons. First of all, Lithuanian, the vernacular traditional architecture of my country is mostly wooden, timber architecture. And of course, if you compare it from one to another region of Europe, you find that it was and continues, to a certain degree, it continues to be used even today. Now, I would like to start with Romania. Unfortunately, I happened to, some 7-8 years ago, I went to Transylvania, which is a part of Romania famous for wooden buildings, but my photos did not survive because of technical reasons. So I had to go to internet now to find, so to say, some examples. Now, the whole heritage, wooden vernacular heritage of Romania, there are basically three most important elements. One and a very exclusive element is gates. For example, if you compare to local Lithuanian traditions or say Polish vernacular traditions, gates were never important. They were never as exquisite. Now, in Romania, gates were artistically and symbolically extremely important. And you can make a comparison, say, with Korean temples, Buddhist temples. Of course, the geographical and cultural differences are wide, but in Korean temples, entrance gates are extremely important, and they have even series of gates, 3 gates that you have to pass while, and in Japan as well, entering the temple. These are secular buildings, the houses of farmers, but they all had very exquisite gates. Now, these are typical Romanian, so to say, dwellings. Vernacular dwellings that did not require, so to say, assistance of professional architects. These were, so to say, built by the members, skilled members of community, or people who were known as masters or builders. In fact, rather than architects. Now, this is the entrance to the house, which I will also try to compare to Lithuanian examples, so that you can see certain correspondences. This is even more curious part. These are traditional wooden churches. Temples, Christian temples, and of course some of them are quite impressive in size. So usually, of course, there are some kind of ideas that wooden buildings were always small and tiny. Nothing of the kind. They built very impressive big buildings, and of course you can find this wooden architecture in the various geographical areas, even in Russia. When I was staying in America, I went to a lecture of Professor Prof, who wrote the history of Russian architecture, and he traveled to many places that are difficult to reach in Siberia, and collected a lot of examples of wooden architecture that are really impressive. These are some architectural elements of these buildings. Now, let me pass to my own heritage, to Lithuanian vernacular and traditional architecture. Well, we have a very old tradition of wooden architecture, and In comparison with other geographical areas, our wooden construction actually was in the cities. It was terminated in the Middle Ages because in the Middle Ages stone and brick was used mainly for the reasons of fire, because fires were very constant phenomena that plagued cities. So they started using stone and brick. Wood came to be used, but later in the 19th century. Poor people, I will show you some examples, started building their houses in wood in the cities. But generally, it was mostly a rural phenomenon. And the photos I will show you now, I made actually during the pandemic, because I had more free time to travel, and I went to several surviving traditional villages in Lithuania. And I will show you not the heritage, which is not intended for the eye of the tourist, for purposes of even cultural tourism. People live there. Some people live there permanently. Some of the houses are maintained by the city dwellers or residences.
Ya, nanti delete.
You see, in Lithuania, we have quite a fashion. If you live in a big city, you always have a small summer house somewhere located in rural areas. I have such a house.
Terutama di situ tuh banyak nyamuk, banyak itu.
5 years ago. Yeah, so this is a typical rural wooden building. It comes from we have 4. Even our country is small. We have 4 different regions. Now these are examples are coming from southern Lithuania, and as you see, this is the house of a rather rich person who could afford a large, it's called two spaces house, you know. These are elements that we have an old tradition of crosses, Christian crosses, and they survive for several hundreds of years. After they fall down, they are a new cross is being put and built instead of the old. Of course, the weather was very bad, so the photos are a little lacking. Yeah, this is a typical Lithuanian house. Now, if you take a look at the roof, so there were different ways how to cover the roof. The original way was to use hay, dry hay, to cover the houses, but now it is very difficult. I will show you some historical examples, but now it is very difficult to find such houses because there are 2 reasons why people stopped, so to say, having these hay roofs. Because of fire considerations, and the second is that we lost craftsmanship. As there is very small demand, so the people do not educate these qualities. There are no masters. Only the hay roofs are now used for big restaurants, mostly restaurant houses that are built in the rural area by big companies, and they can only afford finding a few surviving masters. Of course, this is very costly, so average citizen cannot afford that. Some of the houses, as you see, the wood is not colored. In some cases, people apply color. Yellow would be quite typical for Lithuanian rural houses. Now, if, for example, you go to Belarus, it would be blue. the color would be blue, but blue is not peculiar to Lithuanian country houses. Now, these are small barns that are used in the complexes, and of course these farms are quite different in size and how many buildings. We know that the most rich people, peasants, could possess a farm which could have up to 40 different buildings. So it's quite big. Meanwhile, average farmstead today would have 2 or 3 different buildings. Sometimes even just 2, a living house and a barn to keep things, or these days sometimes they keep their motors in these places. This is another village which I visited last summer, and people, you see, they keep animals and it's functioning. Basically, they use logs for the construction of houses. And now, as far as the roofs are concerned, so these roofs they are already modernized. They use the production which was already available in post-war period because it was very cheap. Now it's considered unsustainable, so people are encouraged to replace them either with metal surface or with clay or any other material. It depends, of course, what people can afford. This is also a quite exquisite traditional building, and as you see in this building, they use also wood for roof covering. Yeah, some are colored, some remain the natural color. Now, I put this example just to show how the entrance was decorated. You saw the Romanian entrance decoration and traditional Lithuanian, which basically have certain correspondences because not only kind of craft work, but also some artistic details were employed. Now, this is the structure of traditional, typical, so to say, Lithuanian house. The most simple and the oldest type was that had only one room and one space. This is a larger house, as you saw in the picture, which has several inside spaces that were used by the family. And of course, as the climate is cold in Lithuania, so fireplace and stove is a very important element. Because during winter, in the older times, the temperature could go 20, 25 grades minus Celsius. So people had to heat their houses. So first of all, they used a fireplace. Eventually, these fireplaces were made out of stones, and the covering was made in the roof. Eventually, the ethnographers believe that they learned that from Slavs, from Russians. They started using clay stoves to heat these traditional buildings. This is not a Lithuanian example, but I chose to show it. It comes from Latvia. It's a neighboring Baltic country, and this house was built in the 19th century. So this is a continuation of tradition, but of course they applied more colors, and it's a bit more an example urban vernacular rather than rural vernacular, because in the rural territories they did not use much colors for practical reasons. Now, as you see, vernacular is not only of course related to rural heritage and rural traditions. You can find a lot of examples in the cities. Just to show you, these are vernacular buildings in Istanbul, Turkey. I visited Istanbul several times on different occasions. And of course, the problem now, what they face, and this is coming from the Ottoman tradition, when people, without the help of the architects, they built their own dwellings. But the problem now is that people cannot afford the maintenance costs. And the government is afraid that there is no legislation, no government support. So discussions are going on how to keep this legacy. Because people move to more modern, so to say, surroundings. They, to restore such houses, you need to afford. This is quite typical Istanbul examples of urban vernacular. So more exquisite examples. This is, of course, a combination between wood and brick. That also reminds little reminiscences with Germany, because in Germany we have our main seaport, which I don't have pictures with me, but there was German influence, so this was so-called Fachwerk. Combination of brick and wood was used in the town buildings. These are, as you see, buildings in Istanbul that are falling apart today. Nobody no longer lives here, but in very many ways they are still beautiful. And this is an example from my city, Vilnius, the capital, and the new center. Here you see the modern contemporary buildings. Actually, they were designed by some of them were designed by professors of my faculty. And these are the context. These are the old urban vernacular buildings that still exist today. They look like slums, but I mean, ordinary people live there, not necessarily the poorest people, but they stick to the place, to the area. And now my doctoral student, who is going to join us this year, she has a research project about studying this particular district, how the urban character and urban plan changed together with architectural qualities. And of course, also another research question and the practical issue is what to do with these buildings. Some politicians would like to demolish them, but a strong group, socially and politically strong group, wants to keep them because it's a part of wooden heritage, but not to keep as a kind of museum, but to keep them alive. So basically, one of the possibilities is to renovate them from the inside, to bring running water and other kind of devices, because people still don't have running water. Neither they have no central heating. They use fireplaces and stoves for keeping the houses during winter. And they take water from the wells, like the dwellers of Vilnius would do in the medieval period. So this is, and now I would like, of course, I'm approaching the end of my lecture. And I would like to end the talk with several questions. You know, the main problem, and it concerns not only my country, it concerns very many countries, and I believe it is important to Indonesia as well. How do we approach this vernacular culture? How do we approach this vernacular architecture? Some people suggest, okay, that we renovate and government gives money for the purposes exclusively of tourism. This is one way of looking at heritage. The other way, there are some radical as I call them, ideologies of progress, who say that as these houses were not built by professional architects, and they are not actually even traditional rural buildings, because some elements are they have no cultural value. They have neither cultural nor aesthetical value, and they should be demolished, and new buildings like these ones should be. This whole region should be made like this. This is the attitude. And of course, there is a third way possible, and maybe even plausible, that you don't view it exclusively as part of heritage, or you don't demolish them, but you try to establish various support programs for people so that it could continue as living tradition. They would continue their normal functions. Normal people, ordinary people who stay there, they would like, because they like the area, they like the territory, they are attached to the place. People, unlike in America, Americans like to change places. They move from city to city many times. But people in Europe and in my country, they are, in this respect, they are more conservative. They have place attachments. And of course, if you don't do anything, they will deteriorate and become like slums, you know, which also neither the municipality nor government would like such a possibility. So there are options. As you see, I took these pictures in Myanmar. These are monasteries. These are monasteries. They are also vernacular monasteries. They don't belong to this kind of important heritage, because they were designed 200 years ago by the monks themselves. But they are used to the very day, because the tradition of monks is still very important in the country. There are dozens of thousands of monks, and they live there. They continue living. And as you see, some of these are beautiful. Now, this I call it this just cultural memory. These are traditional Lithuanian houses with hay roofs I spoke about, but they no longer exist. They exist only in books. In photo collections, in ethnographical museums, they are no longer alive. So it's another attitude to look them as relics of the past, as pieces of museum, and some of these could be, of course, exploited for the purposes of tourism. And here is the example from India. This is the house of the leader of Indian national resistance, Mahatma Gandhi. He chose to spend the last 14 years of his life in this very simple house. Now, of course, this house is a museum. You go and visit. I spend the whole day in this small village. And there is no electricity, but people live there, and they don't move anywhere, except Gandhi and Gandhi's house and a few others. All other houses are used by people today. They continue their traditional way of living, and I talk with them. They are quite happy. They don't care about electricity. They don't care about other modern facilities. Of course, you know, it depends, you know, in different places, you know, people have different demands and expectations and whatever. But this is possible. Huh? As you see, this was a very simple house, and of course he could afford it because it was built by the government. Government wanted to build him a really big house, but he wanted to have a simple. It's called Bapu's hut, father's hut. I started with a quote from Ivan Illich about vernacular. He wrote about vernacular values, and I might close my lecture also with reference to Illich because he visited this hut in 1976. He gave a speech, he stayed for a number of days, and eventually he wrote a very interesting essay comparing the contemporary living conditions with vernacular. And what he implied, that even people today have much more comforts around. Their way of life is never as natural and embedded in the locality, in the tradition, as in these vernacular place. This is, I think, the last picture. And this is the reality of today. It's a picture from Vilnius. So you see a modern structure with a small vernacular house. So we are facing these dilemmas. What shall we do with this heritage? And I would leave this maybe open question for further discussion. I have my viewpoint, but I don't want to push it. So maybe it's best to close with some options. And of course, there might be even more options. I just mentioned three or four ways of looking about the future of these buildings, but maybe there might be much more ways of looking and imagining. Now, also getting back to research done by Professor Mazzola in Italy and in Rome, he also notes that there is no, we have progressed with modernity and modernism that far that there are no easy solutions. Many people would like to have such quarters as Garbatella, but the problem is that during these 100 years, we lost traditions, we lost craftsmanship, and now you have to start institutions. You have to have builders associations. You have to have qualified architects, because majority of contemporary architects are not qualified to work with these traditional materials and ways of building. There are just a few, 2 or 3 schools in the world that work with traditional architecture and urbanism. And one of these schools is Notre Dame University. It's a famous American university located in the state of Indiana, which has branch in Rome. Only a few, because you have to change architectural programs. The other thing is, and I think you know that in Indonesia, because architect John F.C. Turner had worked in the 70s and 80s. He worked with rural communities in many parts in Peru and also Asia and Indonesia, I think in particular, trying to teach local people how to build in a traditional way and to build affordable housing. So there are no projects today. Of course, we still educate, and my own university educates people who are interested in professional, so to say, restoration. But these are people who work only with this type of heritage, like so to say, our historical styles, Baroque, Renaissance, brick, stone, and so on. And we don't educate any longer people who are capable to deal with vernacular. And dealing with vernacular is not simple because it's not simply that a professional can learn and do it. It won't be vernacular any longer. So professional architect who deals with vernacular should also know his limits. A few years ago, during the pandemics, I corresponded with a very interesting man, an architect and retired professor, a friend and associate of my philosopher Ideologies. It was a Swiss architect, Jean Robert, who moved to Mexico in 1972 because he designed a bank, and then he said, I realized the futility of it. I said I did not want to design banks for rich people. I wanted to do something that people really need. So he moved to Mexico, and he told me that in Mexico I realized that as professional architect I am almost useless to local people. I had to re-educate myself and to forget very many things that I was taught. So this is perhaps my so to say last statement for this lecture, and I thank you very much for your attention, for those who came and for those who are online. Thank you.
Agus, thank you very much, Professor. You may sit down now. Yes. Very interesting and insightful presentation. For this session, I would like to give this session to Pak Agus. I am sure that attendants here may have curiosity question related to the very insightful presentation.
Thank you, Pak Aswin, and we start about discussion. And I also join the Zoom too. So if the Zoom attendants want to ask for Professor Samalafisius, please come to the chatting room. Okay, there are no chat in Zoom too, Pak Aswin, and so maybe can somebody stimulate or trigger the discussion, Pak Aswin or Bu Indah?
I have some question, but I would like to give this opportunity to Bu Indah, maybe Pak Iwan. Presentation.
Okay, Bu Indah, please. Where the big? This is big. Okay.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Professor Almantas, for the lectures. And I want to ask this: when we talk about vernacular architectures, then we are talking about the dwelling cultures of the people. And the dwelling cultures will reflect, the vernacular architectures will reflect the dwelling cultures of the people. And this dwelling culture is locally formed, and then, but the problem is that the dwelling culture itself is dynamic. And this dynamic is also formed by a lot of situations like politics, economic, and socials. And then this kind of formation is also can be very different from the older one. It can be very modern, and then the people will adjust, and then they make new traditions, something like that. And it will also come up with new architectures. So I wonder how far this new architectures can be considered vernacular. I'm asking this because, like in Indonesia, I feel like this kind of freedom or a kind of a democratic way of availing the residents like houses is not so free, like in a way that the government, for instance, they always want to put them in the like the apartments or in the flats like this, like and like in your lectures there are a business district, and then next to it there is a vernacular houses. I think it's quite difficult here because then there's a problem of tax, for instance. Like the people would not afford to maintain their house because the tax will increase, and then they will have to then again change their life. So it's quite difficult to sustain the house. So I wonder what is your opinion about vernacular architectures in a place where the changings of this dwelling culture is rapid. I mean, I won't talk about the rural. In rural, maybe that can sustain, but especially those in the city. And then I think that's my questions.
Okay. You know, when I presented in the beginning of my lecture the attitude of Bernard Rudowski, the architecture without architects, so we can start with that. Of course, we can start with concepts. Of course, the concepts change because the reality changes, and when you follow the discussions of I'm a latecomer to because actually I started with studying Baroque architecture. My first book project was more than 30 years ago, was focused on that, and then I came to the history of ideas, urban studies, theories, and whatever, you know. So after very many years, now I turned to vernacular, directly influenced, by the way, by the writings of Ivan Illich and some other people, because I started rethinking modernity. So continuing this, you know, so the concept of vernacular also changes. And in 1964, 65, or 72, you know, this idea, architecture without architects, it shifted. Of course, now we know much more about, we have much more evidence, and we have anthropological research, we have ethnographic research, we have architectural history research, and so on. And I would say some parts of the heritage have been acknowledged as important, which were never, say, 50, 70 years ago, they were not considered important at all. Today, people start to realize, so to say, their cultural value and whatever. Now, of course, we live now in a, as you rightfully said, in a very dynamic society, dynamic times, and this not only internal dynamics but also politics and the globalized world and tourism, and there's a network of various causes and consequences and influences that are going on. So I think it is also important to understand when we look from the point of view of cultural theory. So of course there are kind of two dimensions in culture. What is, so to say, what continues, what does not change, and what changes. So from the point of view of cultural theory, we are more concerned with what remains essential, so to say. But we must also take into consideration that you know, people don't live today like they lived 100 years ago. In my childhood, when I used to visit my grandmother, she lived in a small house which had no electricity, and it was quite natural, you know. But now Old grannies live in houses that have not only electricity, but they have internet, they have television and whatnot. Of course, these are very simple things. There are much more complicated. People's change their way of living, and it's in every locality, in every country, you have different communities. By the way, for example, in Copenhagen, in Denmark, they have a city within city, which is called Christiania. Actually, it is ruled, rules of governmental rules do not apply. So people live like in like squatters there, you know. There is no policing. Police comes only if there is a drug issue, you know, narcotics. So they only interfere. Otherwise, people continue. And of course, now we witness various new types of communities and very different ones. So this makes us to acknowledge that the attitude towards vernacular should also change, because, you know, we can't disregard or pretend that there are no changes, that new things are not coming, you know. The same, you know, I discussed things with linguists. In Lithuania, you know, we spent 125 years under Russian occupation. So we have a very old and rich language tradition, but it was affected. We started to use Slavic words and so on. And now the English plays a very important part, you know. But we can't, you know, the language is a thing that is not a museum, you know, it's a living thing. So, and there are, of course, different groups of linguists who look, one say, oh, we have to continue with this, you know, but there are new words, not just words, new realities. So they come into language, and you have to agree that they exist. Because otherwise, we could have only just kind of language police, policing people how to speak. But people are free, you know. They use language as a communication tool. So the same applies to vernacular ways of living. I think the broader the understanding, the better, because then, of course, if you acknowledge this not only continuity but changes, then you can also think that maybe legislation has to be changed in some respects. Maybe some municipal policies can be applied. Maybe some economic terms might be used, you know, to help to sustain people and so on and so on.
In a way that they sustain maybe for centuries, but nowadays people can change their life fastly into maybe only one generation or two generations, like that.
You know, I've been following discussions, so to say, global discussions about vernacular traditions, and for example, the work of Professor Nazar El-Said from University of California, and all these world gatherings. So I think they are right that tradition is not. Some of the traditions are not sustainable at all. There are building types that actually. You can't call them, maybe they were sustainable 300 or 400 or 500 years ago, but they are no longer. And this is also has to be taken into consideration. Sometimes, you know, the people who might be called as traditionalists, they a little simplify the issue. They say, oh, there are certain ways that we must stick, but you know, many things change. Even we know that philosophical traditions change. Even religions, they undergo certain. Religion is the most continuous thing, you know, but it's still also little by little changes occur.
Thank you, Professor.
Yes, thank you. So we have a different historical background because we are colonized by the Dutch. So we are rarely discussing about vernacular architecture in relation to urban context. So in urban context, we mostly discuss about the colonial buildings. We discuss about vernacular architecture in the context of a rural area, sometimes in the remote area. So it's a bit different in context between the European and also the Indonesian. That's why when we start to discuss about the vernacular, we are rather to relate the issue about vernacular with the kampung settlement that's mostly developed after the independence. So it's about 1950, 1960. We can call it vernacular architecture, but mostly is in the form of kampung settlement. And that's why when we discuss about the what you call restoration, how to make this sustainable, we are mostly concerned with the colonial buildings rather than the vernacular, because we don't have vernacular building in the city area mostly that deserve to be conserved or to make it a kind of symbol of the sustainable cultures. Maybe it's better if you have a time to visit one of the vernacular settlement, like you're going to, yeah, Braga is the urban area, urban vernacular in Bandung. So we have a kind of image about what is colonial vernacular architecture in city, mostly in Indonesia. And also, if you want to see the vernacular building in the remote area, you can also visit Kampung Naga, maybe Kampung Pulo. If you have time, maybe it's better to visit this kind of location, so you can have a kind of idea how they are actually what you call separate themselves actually. But also in the same time, they make a kind of how do you get good relation with the natural environment at the same time. So when we listen about the case in European cities, for example, we have a kind of learning different issues about this. Mostly, I think also why also the colonial building cannot be sustained because of the taxation system. Mostly the colonial building located in the main street. Then the municipal government have a kind of policy that make all the building within the main streets have a kind of heavy taxation. And sometimes the resident couldn't afford to pay the tax. Then they have to sell the property and move to other places. And of course, the building will be abandoned or will be destroyed altogether and rebuilt by the new owners. That's, I think, the case in particularly in all the big cities in Indonesia. I think that's all what I can say.
Yeah, thank you. By the way, I learned about kampung through Indonesian publications in my journal. I had no idea. 5-6 years ago, I have no idea. But as articles started to come, I said, "What's this kampung? Kampung?" And then little by little, and of course, when I went to Semarang, they took me to some kampungs to show around, and of course, it's very different than what you see in other cities and other cultures. And of course, if you speak about colonial heritage, of course, it differs from country to country. When I visited Vietnam, I was impressed to find that they still have these traditional wooden buildings from that where they kept. Some of them were Chinese. Chinese buildings are different from Vietnamese buildings. Then there was French influence. So of course, each culture is very different. And I would say I had a very interesting experience when I was. I went several times to teach and to do research in America. And my longest stay was a whole semester, about 6 months. I stayed in Chicago, and I lived in the Mexican quarters, which are not considered prestigious. Some people consider it dangerous even, but it was very interesting. It was neither crime-ridden nor dangerous in any way. But you could also see the differences of the vernacular culture, how people understand the role of space. For example, in Western countries, pavement is considered to be a public place. It's for walking. It would be very difficult to see even in the Lithuania situation when somebody comes up and sits down, like in Turkey. Brings a few chairs and tea and sit and drink, and the people are walking. Mexicans have the same attitude that pavement, is not any kind of its extension of your private. It's both public and private, And when they have festivities, when they have friends, they go and sit nearly up to where they park cars. It's very, very differs from other cultures, and I would say this is one of the examples how these vernacular traditions they continue even in the urban, so to say, surroundings.
Good morning, Professor Samalafisius. There's so many questions. Professor, there's so many questions actually, but maybe I will ask only 3. First, about the conservation. In Indonesia, we have a very multicultural background and a long history of colonialism and many influence from the we called merchandise from Arabic and Chinese to the Dutch colonialism to the maybe around Southeast Asian, the Melayu. So when we try to do a conservation, there's a big questions that we have to choose the answer. This conservation is whose culture that we should be conserved first, and for whom we conserve that. Because till today, I saw that the government approach is conserved for the tourism, not for the living culture in there, not for the community who hold the tradition. But if we want to change our approach to the livable conservation, we have to conserve the community first who hold the tradition. I really want to know your opinion about that. The secondly is about how about we face the force of to be in global or unified language when we talk about the vernacular architecture, because the needs of the change of the technology and how we have to live along with the new technology. That's we cannot say that we have to live in our old tradition. So there's so many cases that we have to ask again and revisiting about the tradition itself, which one we know and which one we want to be later. And the next is, I wonder your opinion about the ethnographic and phenomenological research in architecture, which is we need to still doing that for the vernacular architecture in Indonesia, because we have so many wide range from a very indigenous local, which is live in remote area, until today the urban vernacular, which live in a very high-tech technology. Thank you, Professor.
Well, these are very serious, serious issues that you raised, and I don't even think that we can sufficiently discuss all them because it's too little time, and it requires a kind of specialized look. But say, starting with communities and so to say their vernacular kind of legacy or culture. Of course, I realize that there are differences in each particular country. For example, when I stayed in Nepal, I learned that they have more than 100, I think 130 nationalities or ethnic groups. They are very different, and it depends, of course, on the society and on the media and on the government to realize how important all this heritage of each community is. If I could give an example from Lithuania, we, you know, this idea of monolithic nation, one nation, comes from the 19th century. And though we used to look at ourselves as Lithuanians, kind of, you know, speaking this language and having this kind of ethnic tradition, you know, when you look basically into your own roots, so it's you find that there is nothing very pure about your national roots. For example, in my family, there is French ancestry, there is German ancestry. As well as Lithuanian ancestry, and we have a few small but very important communities. We have to mention but a few. We have about a small community, about 300-400 people of Karaites who moved in the 15th century from Crimea, from the Black Sea. And they did not show very much. They kept a rather close identity. They married other Karaites from other European countries. Somehow they wanted to remain, you know, all this. And after the independence, you know, somehow the government realized that, oh, you know, we have this old community, and now it's very small, but we have historical city close to Vilnius, our one of the first historical capitals where they majority of them live. Now they opened lots of restaurants because they were encouraged. They got a little economic support and so on. And now this presence is very, very strong. And people go and learn about their kitchen, and with kitchen they learn about their customs. For example, we have a very old Muslim community, which is rather unusual, but we have Tatars also coming from the 15th century when our ancestors had wars with Tatars. So those Tatars who were on the side of our rulers, so they moved to the country. and they have names that you can recognize the ancestry. They keep the religion. They have mosques, and this presence is very important. I don't know if I even I don't think I can address all the issues because I need to which you raised, because I need to think a little about that. Maybe we could discuss sometime after the lecture because they need some reflection.
Thank you for your time. My name is Disti. I'm from doctoral program in architecture. I've read some of your writings, and as you told yesterday during the talk with the faculty members, you're very skeptical and critical about mainly everything. So I wondered, it's a bit personal maybe, but I hope you find it my question. Have you had any thought or imagination about what good architecture or what good cities like? Because most of your writing is criticizing everything, and I wonder, do you have any positive thought about architecture and built environment, or you just your personal view is about to criticize and emphasize what should be improved, and what do you think about the shape of the ideal or a good built environment? Well, it's very personal maybe, but I really like to know that. Thank you very much.
Okay. Well, in the response, you know, as I have really written quite a number of books, some 14 books and some 14 edited books, as well as articles and essays. So you don't know all my views. I guess. So of course I have positive views and ideas. You know, first of all, maybe I would like to explain my criticism. You know, some time ago, when I was younger, I was very much interested in avant-garde, in early modernism, and so on. And when I tried to look around about what it finally produced, I was really horrified, because something that was started with very kind of idealistic ideas became a very oppressive ideology and climate. And I've traveled to very many places, and everywhere I witnessed almost the same: how things are erased, how traditional vernacular ways of life are discouraged, how people are turned into a kind of beings without, not real, but imagined identities, with some produced identities, you know. Now, of course, if we speak about good architecture, for example, I can tell you also my very personal feelings. I feel very much at home when I go to Italy. And when I go to these old Italian or cities on the Adriatic coast in Croatia, or built on hilltops that are 600, 700, 800 years old, I feel really well, because they are not big. These spaces are very human. Surroundings and scenery is appreciated. There is a very good relation between the landscape and the surroundings. And simply, you know, I'm not speaking about these important heritage buildings, you know, which you go to see in Rome or Paris or elsewhere. About very simple, small towns. You can feel how really nice urban atmosphere was and still could be. And even in my hometown, you know, the old part of the city is really beautiful. I've written a lot about the genius loci, about the feeling of place. We also have a very varied topography. Vilnius is also very famous for combination of nature and architecture. It's a hilly area with rivers. And now, even today, I think 1/3 or even more, the territory of the city is green. So I really appreciate these kind of things. But what makes me critical is understanding that little by little, but gradually, we are losing nearly everything. You know. Also, I can share one more kind of very personal thing. You know, when I came to Asia for the first time, I came as an absolutely stupid tourist. I acknowledge that. I came with no understanding, no knowledge, you know. Oh, you know, it's nice, you know, blue sea, you know, and suddenly I realized that I need to come back with more knowledge, and I started to come back. For 20 years. I'm going from country to country, and my interests changed. I tried to understand the difference and to see, and also what makes me really angry is to see how the landscape and scenery is changing. Commerce and also tourism industry is killing. For example, Thailand has so many beautiful places, islands, and there are these chain hotels and highways, and I discussed with some Buddhist. There is a famous Buddhist thinker in Thailand, Sulak Sivaraksa. I had a conversation with him, and one of my questions to him was, "What do you think about tourism? Does it bring good or bad?" And you know, the answer is, he says, finally, tourism brings more bad things than good things. So what I am concerned, if to speak about some ideas that I'm concerned today, I am interested in limits. I'm interested in limits to very many things, because we need to understand, you know, what we want to sustain, what we need to sustain, and what we want to change. But you know, as we live in the world where the money is the biggest player, and money is generated, money has no identity. It is generated by faceless institutions. It is a very powerful instrument of change, and this of course, you know, I think that, you know, criticism, you see, we need a lot of, and actually I wrote a textbook of architectural criticism for my students, so that they can understand what approaches can we use, you know, how we can distinguish between different modes. But I think criticism in contemporary societies is very important, you know, because, you know, if you think, actually, you know, we have, and also I studied, in one of my books, I studied, so to say, the history of utopia. We had a lot of architectural utopias in the 20th century, and some of them looked very nice. But you see, when some of them were implemented, it led to very disastrous things. Even some social ideas, for example, the idea of communism has a lot of attractive things which you can agree with, but the practice was more than horrible. I have members in the family who spent years in gulags, in Soviet prisons. My uncle spent 10 years for disagreeing with this vision of communism. So getting back, I'm concerned about limits, because, and I believe this is a very big issue that is coming, because also, you know, I've been reading a lot about, I became, in recent years, I became very suspicious about the ideas of sustainability. because very many ideas are based on wrong assumptions. One of the ideas is that technology will bring you a brighter future, which is absolute nonsense, I would say. We need technologies, but technologies themselves, they not only solve, they solve smaller problems, but create bigger problems. Also our responses, you know, the belief that you can switch easily and absolutely to 100% of renewable energy is also absolute utopia. And very serious environmental thinkers whom I met and with whom I communicate are equally skeptical about that. Because and there are and I mean good people who want to change the world for better. Of course, we we are in a very kind of strange position. We cannot continue with the old way. We cannot, for example, continue with oil as we did for 200 years, simply because it's almost no more available. But we can't switch. So and what is left? What is left is a lot of talking, a lot of political mimicry. And even the word, you know, when I hear the word sustainability, you know, I start kind of shuddering, you know, because it became almost a catchphrase that almost means nothing. Now, also when you look at architecture, you know, after so many research, after so many conferences, after so many courses, university courses, the real progress is so small. Look at the old building industry, you know. It's going the same direction. The expansion of cities and it reminds me the situation in the 19th century in England. There were a lot of people who understood the problems of industrialism and their consequences, but there were no easy means how to deal with them. And I think we are in the same situation. We have some great ideas, we know, but our possibilities are not that great, if you don't want to be too much skeptic. But of course, I realize that we must do something, because otherwise it's absolute collapse in France. Yeah, but
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Almantas Samilivicius. This is a very insightful lecture, and we hope that we can continue our discussion about this for the future. And also, there are we just think that many places that may be interested for you to visit during your visit in Bandung, or we can arrange later, maybe you can come again to Indonesia to visit some places that, yes, maybe the problem is we have very limited time to discuss, and also to both from experience from Indonesia and also from Lithuania. But I believe we can continue with email and so on for the future. Thank you very much. I think maybe we can take a picture for, yeah, together with the.
So we still have this afternoon session, yeah, with the students. Yeah, I save my question related with this lecture later on. So student, please come back. Maybe 1:30, yeah, we start. Lantai 3 ya. Okay then. Over there ya, in the architecture building. So Professor, later after lunch we will have a discussion with the students ya, at the architecture building. Okay. Now thank you Professor for this lecture.
Bagus tuh di belakang apa itu? Oke, please in Zoom.
Yang di Zoom bisa dibuka videonya untuk foto bersama. Yang di Zoom boleh di-on-kan videonya untuk foto bersama. Terima kasih.
Bisa minta link absennya ya? Oke, terima kasih.